week, we have a welcome return of someone who we've seen before. William Sargent, if you didn't see him last time round, is a yellow belly, Lincolnshire farmer on the fen just east of Newark, and in a good year he puts a few pounds to one side to buy himself another chair. He came to speak to us before on what we then termed the traditional vernacular chair making in Lincolnshire, with special mention of Louth, Alford and Spilsby. And if you remember him coming, it's almost exactly 2 years ago to the day. It was the 10th of October 2017 he was here. And he spent a wonderful amount of time talking about the rush-seated ladder-back chairs, of which he had many examples, and was going to rush through the Windsor chairs in 5 minutes flat. And I said, please don't do that. Come back on another occasion and do it. So he is here this evening to do just that. And I'm hoping that he's pleased that he put that on hold, because in fact he's had an exciting time for the last 2 years finding out all sorts of extra information, which he's very kindly been keeping me in the loop about. So we have some new research being revealed, as it were, almost for the first time tonight, although he has written it up for, or some of it I know, for the Regional Furniture Society, which is a fundamental member, I think. So will you please welcome William Sargent.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you very much, Jean. Thank you very much to the Louth Museum Society, or whatever it's called, for inviting me here again. There's no need for me to repeat my name. I've got an awful lot of chairs, probably far too many, and I've got some very good friends as well who've got collections of Lincolnshire chairs, and between us we have got countless chairs. But it's essential, if you're doing research into this subject, to have a lot of chairs so you can contrast and compare. We are lucky at the minute that a lot of these chairs are relatively cheap, but to us they are so important. I give a lot of talks throughout the county, and also, as Jean mentioned, I'm a member of the Regional Furniture Society, and I do give talks to them. And back in March of this year, I was down in London giving a talk to the members of the Regional Furniture Society, and I spoke to them about the start of Windsor chair making in Grantham, because nobody had really sorted that out. And it's taken me quite a few years, but I think I know exactly in what sequence it happened and who was doing what dates they were working, and also what patterns of chairs they were making. And it's a really important part of history of Grantham and of Lincolnshire as well. I just want to mention the Regional Furniture Society because it's really important. The Regional Furniture Society has many members, and a lot of them are purely passive. They don't take any part, but they come to the events and they read the publications. But also in the Regional Furniture Society are some of the country's leading furniture historians, and I just love going to the events, and I enjoy talking to the people there as much as I enjoy about going to the events. I just wanted to show you the sort of things that they publish. And I would encourage you to have a look at their website. Twice a year they produce this, which is the newsletter. There's some really interesting articles in there as well. And once a year they publish the journal. The journal is an academic volume, and there's some wonderful, interesting articles of the latest research. I think most people get that because they're a member, and they flick through it, look at the pictures, and a few people read the text. But the interesting thing is they have a conference every year, and this year the conference was in Shropshire, last year it was up in Glasgow, the year before that it was in Lowestoft. The conference lasts for about 3 or 4 days, and there's an awful lot of events organised, and there's talks at night. They usually manage to get into private houses with wonderful collections of furniture, and they're not just interested in furniture, they're interested in vernacular buildings as well. But what you need to know is next year the conference is in Lincoln. It's not on the news site yet. They're obviously expecting me to have some input one evening when it comes to a talk about Lincolnshire chairs. And if you want to join in with that, and there will be some wonderful places to visit, I would encourage you to join the society and come along and see what the sort of, and speak to the people there, because you'll be amazed at the knowledge within the society. Right, that's enough of plugging them. I'm here tonight to talk to you about Windsor chairs. And Lincolnshire has a huge tradition of rush-seated chairs, as you probably, most of you saw 2 years ago when I was talking here, but also it has a fabulous tradition as well of making rush-seated ladderback chairs, but also making Windsor chairs as well. And when I give these talks, I can almost preempt the questions that I'm going to get, because they're exactly the same questions that I used to ask myself 10 or 15 years ago when I started doing this research. The obvious question is, why are they called Windsor chairs? Who was the first person to make them? Where were they made first of all? What is the oldest chair that anybody's ever found? All those sorts of questions. So what I'm going to do tonight is to preempt those, and I'll answer those questions first of all. But before I do that, I need to just to explain to you what is a Windsor chair, because it's not immediately obvious. And it still amazes me, I come across people all the time and they ask me, what is a Windsor chair? And I've got 2 chairs here to start off tonight. This is a Windsor chair, and that one isn't. How many people at home have a Windsor chair in their house? Good, there's a few of you. I bet one thing has not escaped your notice about these chairs. It's the seat. That one comes out. This one I would call a cabinet maker's chair. People might call it a frame chair, or even a joint chair, or a joiner's chair. This one, the seat here, is a solid slab of wood, and that is the defining feature of a Windsor chair, and that is the only feature that it is defined by. All the legs underneath are socketed in, and all the back support are socketed in from above. If you take the seat away from the cabinet maker's chair, it has no effect on its strength. You can't use it, but you can put anything you like back in its place. And you'll notice that the cabinet maker's chair, just about every component is shaped. These just happen to be turned, where usually on a Windsor chair, every component is turned. The cabinet maker's chairs, both of these, I think, were made in Lincolnshire. I actually know this one was made in Lincolnshire because at the back of the seat there is a name stamp. It's got the stamp of the surname of the master who ran the workshop, and underneath it, it says Grantham. So I'm in no doubt where that one is made. When it comes to cabinet makers' chairs, I have never ever found one with a maker's stamp on, and I don't think I ever will. They are exceedingly rare, and the reason is that the people who worked in the cabinet maker's workshop would quite happily make every piece of household furniture, and there would be a bench somewhere where somebody would have made chairs, but nobody ever put their names on those bits of furniture. Well, the Windsor chair tradition, it was really strong, it was really competitive, and if the owners of the workshops wanted free advertising, they would put their names on the back. And just because the name's on the back doesn't mean it was the person who made it. It is the name of the master who was running the workshop. He might have employed 3 or 4 journeymen, whose names we'll probably never know, and there would have been apprentices as well in the workshop. So I think I've made it clear what is a Windsor chair. To be honest with you, you could use shaped components in a Windsor chair if you wanted to. It's just that the Windsor chairs tend to be the region of turners. You probably all remember grandfather's chairs, and they're the ones at the back which are slats. They are not turned, but they are still Windsor chairs. Right, I'll just move this one out of the way. And so by that definition, what is that? It's a Windsor chair, absolutely right. It's got the solid seat, it hasn't got arms, every component has been turned except the top rail, which is shaped. When Windsor chairs are advertised in the 1700s, you find two expressions. The first one is a Windsor armchair, which obviously refers to this, and the second expression is a Windsor back stool. And if you can imagine this, without the back, you have got a stool with four legs. So you can start to see where the origins of a Windsor chair lay. That is why they were called back stools, because somebody had the bright idea one day of putting a back on the stool. The next thing I want to move on to is a little bit about the history of the Windsor chair. And the problem is, there's nothing written down about the beginnings and the makings of Windsor chairs. And the reason why it's so important is because it is just about, essentially, an English tradition. There was a small tradition in Scotland, and nobody denies there were chairs made in the Welsh borders in sort of a rural, rustic fashion. But if you go to the continent, you have no history at all of making Windsor chairs. There's a huge tradition in North America, but nobody denies that that was taken there by craftsmen from this country who emigrated in the 1600s or the early 1700s and took the tradition with them. And people have done a lot of research into the past about the beginnings of the Windsor chairs, and it's quite obvious that right up to about 1700 or even 1710, there is no mention of Windsor chairs. And that is about the beginning when people think that Windsor chairs were first made. And it's interesting that when people are doing research, they actually come across another term at the same time. And they come across the term forest chair. And it seems to relate to chairs that were used in gardens. And it seems to be that that expression, forest chairs and Windsor chairs, are interchangeable. And the first slide that I want to show you tonight just demonstrates it very neatly. You might have heard of somewhere called Chevening House in Kent, near Sevenoaks. I think it actually belongs to the government, and it's a government property. That was built in the 1630s, and it is the most wonderful mansion, and it has massive gardens as well. The interesting thing about it, when a member of the family who owned that house in 1723, an inventory was drawn up of all the household furniture. And there was no mention of Windsor chairs there, but fortunately for furniture historians, they actually included the garden. And it makes fascinating reading. And can we have the first slide, please, Nigel? Or the next slide. There we are. Chevening House, it was built before 1630. And I've just paraphrased bits and pieces out of the inventory. And that inventory was written in 1723, and it quite clearly states, when it looks into the garden, that there are 34 large garden seats and 6 Windsor chairs painted green. And then it goes on to mention rollers, barrows, and other garden implements, but they were itemised. But what happened 2 years before, there was another death in the family, or there had been another death in the family, and in the inventory had taken place 2 years before. And again, 34 large seats were mentioned, and immediately after that it says 48 forest chairs. I don't know whether it was the same person who did the inventory or not, but it looks like those 48 forest chairs have been added to another dozen to give you the 60, and the person who was doing the inventory was quite happy to swap the words round, forest chairs or Windsor chairs. And it is a really good example of the interchangeability of the meanings of the words. it's almost like the forest chairs were made to go outside, and maybe the Windsor chairs were exactly the same, but some of them went inside. The other thing at the bottom there is a print done of Chevening House from 1719. And people, for a long time, have believed that these Windsor chairs or forest chairs in the garden settings were used so people could enjoy performances in the pavilions in the afternoons or in the evenings. I have to tell you, I'm not entirely convinced by that. And I think the answer actually lies in those first two lines with the 34 seats and the 60 Windsor chairs and the 34 garden seats and the 48 forest chairs. We all know what a Windsor chair is. You can sit in them. They are seats. These were out in the garden. So it looks like there were 60 garden seats outside, but also in front of it there were 34 garden seats as well. Why didn't the person just write down 94, thank you, garden seats? Then he would have covered everything. Why didn't he write it down as 94 garden seats? Anybody got any ideas? I would have done. Oh, yeah, well that's a start. They might have been different sizes. What if the garden seats were not chairs? And I've just done a bit of research into this, looking at exactly what garden seats are. You've all heard of John Soames, I hope. He has the most, well, he was born about 1750, and as a young man, he became an architect, and he was one of the country's leading architects. He did the whole of the Bank of England and places like that. When he was a young man, he wrote a book. And I've got a facsimile of it here, and I'll read you the title. And it's full of drawings of buildings which he would build for people. And the name of this book, the title of this book is Designs in Architecture, consisting of plans, elevations and sections for temples, baths, pavilions, garden seats, obelisks and other buildings. So you tell me what a garden seat is. It is a building, it is not a seat. And it shows you quite clearly some of the drawings of garden seats in here. They are small summer houses, made of brick, made of stone. They have roofs on them. You could even have them built out of wood. They are substantial structures. Some of them are open, some of them are closed. Some of them are built in the Chinese fashion, some are built in the modern taste, some are even built in the Gothic fashion. Oh, you're going to say something, Jean, come on.
But I'm going to proffer something. The word chair, to me, means a seat for one person.
Right.
But a seat can mean a long bench
It could.
or a settee,
Yeah.
or for more than one person.
Okay, tell me this. A gentleman that has a house in town and has a country seat as well, what's his country seat? No, it's an interesting point. Thank you very much for raising that, because we come across that all the time. We know what these words mean now, but these people 300 years ago had when you're doing history, they can have a complete and utter different meaning to these chairs. That is the reason why he separated these out when he was doing the inventory. And if you look at the drawings of them, some of them do have a flat seat, some of them have nowhere for resting in there at all. And so if you were walking through these massive gardens, you would come across these small summer houses, and if you wanted to rest, what would you want inside them? You would want to see, wouldn't you? And I think it is blinding. You haven't heard this before, have you?
No, I question your use of the word seat in that sentence.
All right, okay. But it's blindingly obvious to me that when the chap was going around looking at these little summer houses, which he called garden seats, he noted down the number of chairs in them. They are entirely separate things. So I think the beginnings and the dates of this as well, look at this, this is 1721, this is right back at the beginning of the history of Windsor chairs. And I think the initial use of Windsor chairs or forest chairs was outside in the gardens. They were painted green so they could withstand the weather because they stocked out the whole of the year. I don't think they were brought inside. This is the first time I've actually ever mentioned this to anybody. Nobody's actually heard this explanation before. What do you think of that, Julian?
I'll buy bits for it.
Good, thank you. I'll take his approval anyway.
You used the word large. Why large? Why specifically? Why did you have to put large?
Why do they have to put large in? You can get them all different shapes and sizes, that's why. And obviously the larger ones are more
Is
valuable.
it portable?
No, these were permanent structures, built out of stone and with spires and all sorts on them as well. They were elaborate little buildings, but you could seat several people inside them.
Is there any evidence of that at the house?
At the house, you know, I don't know.
34 large garden seats.
I've seen that print mentions in 1719, and obviously they're not on there, but the gardens are massive. And they go on and on, they've got walkways, they've got little lakes in them as well, but it doesn't show any garden seats. You're absolutely right, that is the next thing to look for, if we can find old drawings, old designs with garden seats on them.
34 is an awful lot.
It is, it's huge, isn't it? But the wealth that these people had was just massive, and if they wanted to do it, they would. And I don't know, it was a Stanhope family who had this, I think, if my memory serves me right. The other little place where I've actually come across the word, or other researchers have come across the words forest chair and Windsor together, and it's just a neat little link, and I want to show you this as well. If we could just have the next slide, please. Somebody? This is not terribly clear. I took this photograph out of a book. It was in one of the regional Furniture Society journals, but it just serves the point. It's got these two words in it as well. The very first word, which is difficult to see in fact, does say receipt. And I'll read it if you like. It's receipt of chairs bought by Col Kramer for my Lord Irvine, April the 4th, 1720. And the next line is ditto, 8 forest chairs at 6pence each. The next line is ditto, carriage from Windsor, 6pence each. And the next line says ditto, carry from the Savoy, I think, to the carriers, 3pence each. So there you've got forest chairs being moved from Windsor, and I presume it was the town, not the castle or the forest. Windsor's on the Thames, and they were being conveyed to the middle of London, to the Savoy. And there's old maps, and you can see where the Savoy was, and even had steps down into the Thames. And then they were going to be carried on elsewhere. Lord Irvine, his family had Temple Newsome, which is just outside Leeds. And some of you might have been there. It's a wonderful day out. It's actually owned by Leeds City Council now. And if you've never been, I'd advise you to go. And a researcher, a curate who was in charge there, Christopher Gilbert, came across that, and it neatly sums up, puts those two words together. Just because they were carried from Windsor doesn't mean they were made in Windsor, but there's a good indication that they were made close to Windsor. So you just imagine, if you were the person stood on the steps, waiting for the boat to come down the Thames, somebody comes across to you and say, "What are you waiting for?" The reply could be, "I'm waiting for the Windsor chairs." It might have happened, but that's 1720. So it just gives you some idea of the history. Before this, there's only the smallest handful of references to Windsor chairs or forest chairs. So we're right back at the beginning of Windsor chair making, and people think it started probably about 1710. The other thing that people often ask about is the earliest design of chair, and this one in fact, this one's stamped by tailors in Grantham. So I'm often asked, which is the earliest signed chair which is known in existence? And the earliest one that everybody refers to is a chair made by John Pitt. And John Pitt ran a business as a wheelwright and a chair maker down in what is now Slough. The village, I forget, is it Upton cum Claverley?
Chalvey.
Thank you. But it's now overtaken by Slough, and that again is very close to Windsor. And that chair was first brought to the historian's notice back in 1976 when it appeared in a letter in the Country Life. The interesting thing, that chair was then offered for sale 21 years ago in 1998 for Christie's in February of that year. And underneath the seat, it had a paper label which clearly says that it was made by John Pitt. And I've actually found a photograph of that. I've been in touch with Christie's once or twice. They have no reference to it anymore, and they have no images. So I managed to actually find a picture again in some other people's research, and if we could have the next image, please. That is not the best of images to show you, and I do apologise for that, but it just shows you, you can see it's a Windsor chair, it's got shaped legs to it, there's an awful lot of work gone into that. It would have been an expensive chair. I doubt that this was made as a chair to go in the garden. It is simply far too good. It would have been very expensive. And if you knew your chairs were going to spend the next 50 years outside, would you put a paper label underneath them? No, I don't think so. John Pitt was born in 1714. So by the time he was 21, he would have finished his apprenticeship. That would have been 1735, thank you very much. And then he would have probably joined his father's workshop. His father, William, was in the woodworking business as well. His father died a few years later, so he could, in theory, have been master of the workshop by 1740. He'd have still been in his mid or late 20s at that time. And he only lived for another 20 years afterwards, so this chair was made in his workshop between 1740 and 1759, which is a long time after the first references we've had for Windsor chairs. And everybody has thought for a long time he is the earliest known Windsor chair maker in the world. I've seen it written down quite a few times, that he had the earliest named chair and he was the earliest known Windsor chair maker. Well, all of that changed last year. There was an article published in the Regional Furniture Society Journal, 2018, this is last year. This article, the journal came out, and there's an unassuming little article right in the middle, and the title of the article is quite simple. The title is Joseph Newton, Windsor chair maker of Fenton in Lincolnshire. And the main thrust of that article was an advert that appeared in the Stamford Mercury. The Stamford Mercury started, I think, about 1710, and this man had enough wisdom to put an advert in the Stamford Mercury. And I think it's well worthwhile reading that advert. And if you can have the next article, please. Sorry, next slide. Just look at that date, the 1st of July, 1725. This is way before John Pitt. And if we just read this together, this is to give notice to all gentlemen and others that have a desire to furnish themselves with new fashioned Windsor chairs of the best sort, I'm just going to get closer, of the best sort, may be furnished by Joseph Newton, the maker, living at Fenton in the parish of Beckingham in Lincolnshire, 4 miles from Newark-upon-Trent in Nottinghamshire. And there is a chair to be seen at White Hart in Newark for a sample on one of the Angel in Grantham. He proposes to deliver them at these places at 7 shillings and 6pence per chair, and at Lincoln at 8 shillings, with as much speed as possible after notice given. Isn't that amazing? And what is even more amazing is every morning when I get up and I open my bedroom curtain windows And I look across the field, the first thing I see is Fenton Steeple. I live in the next parish. Isn't that wonderful? This chap, Joseph Newton, was born in 1676. He would have finished his apprenticeship even before John Pitt was born. When he placed this advert, I'm not exactly sure of his birth date, but when this advert was put in the Stamford Mercury, he was either 49 or 50 years old. So he'd been around for quite a while. It's conceivable he could have been making chairs several years before he placed that advert. And what is even more incredible, if you can believe it, 4 years later, he put another advert in the Stamford Mercury with even more details. Have the next one? Look at this. Look at the date, 8th of May, 1729, and I'll read it out again. This is to give notice that Joseph Newton of Fenton in the county of Lincoln, 4 miles distant from Newark-upon-Trent, maketh all sorts of Windsor chairs. The price of a single chair is 7 and 6 again. The seat 2s, seat 3s and 4s, all 7 shillings per seat, and are to be sold at John Fox's gunsmith in Grantham, at Mr. Taylor's at the Reindeer, and Mr. John Farrow's, both of Newark, and at Mr. John Shackleton's in Nottingham, and gentleman that has a desire of any of the said chairs may be furnished at any of the above places. They may go by water from Newark to Nottingham, Gainsborough or Lincoln for 3d a seat. This is interesting. I have furnished a great many gentlemen gardeners with them, and they are esteemed above those that come from London for both ease and comfort. Isn't that fantastic? The first thing to point out that nobody actually would admit that he is the earliest Windsor chair maker, because he mentions these coming from London. They're his competition. But we will probably never ever know their names. They might have been journeymen in a wheelwright's workshop, like John Pitt. And we haven't found them yet, and we probably never will do. The interesting thing is, Joseph Newton of Fenton is the earliest known Windsor chair maker in the world. We know of nobody else before him. And there's several other interesting things about this as well. He emphasises that they are going to go by water, and that is important. The roads were really bad. If somebody ordered 20, 30, 40 or even 60 Windsor chairs, like they did in Chevening House, if they're going to go by water, when you took them off the boat, when you received them, they would be in the same condition as when they were put on the boat. If you sent them by road, they would be knocked to pieces. So it was so important to him to have the water, and he emphasised that. And also, you can't see it very well, the 4th line down, he says that he maketh all sorts of Windsor chairs. Why would he put that sentence in? And what did he mean? Because underneath is already said he makes single, doubles, triples and 4-seaters, which I think referred to as settees. Why would he say he makes all sorts of Windsor chairs? You going to give another idea? Oh, that's very good. Yes, this young lady said, I've got 2 here. Right, so he, I think, was saying that he makes armchairs and he makes back stools. But not only that, it wouldn't surprise me if he was implying, even though he's furnished gentlemen gardeners for them, and I'm pretty sure we know where they would have went, I would think he was saying that if you want some of these for the house, I will make them. So I think he was saying to people, I make 3 sorts of chairs. The outside armchair, the inside armchair, and back stools as well. Well, that's just a different in design, yeah. And I'm sure he would make any design that you wanted to do, but he would have his stock design that his men would make and they would make it regular. That is the way workshops works. Once they've got a pattern for the seat, for the backbone, for the legs, they would stick to that pattern. And the reason you do that is you don't have to think about what you're doing. Anybody can make the components, anybody can stick them together, but you would get the same chair. And that's how all of these workshops worked. And in many respects, that's about the end of what we can say about Joseph Newton. I must say, when I'm stood here at the minute, there's an awful lot of expectant faces. And I'm just wondering, do you think that I'm going to pull a chair out now, which has got the stamp of Newton of Fenton on? Well, I've got a surprise for you. The answer's no. That is a crazy thought. The chance of me finding a stamped chair after 300 years is ridiculous. I mean, I don't think they exist. So how are we going to find his chairs? It's a tall order, isn't it? Well, we know he made them. This is a primary source. You cannot argue with this. And there might be some of his chairs left about, but how would we know if we came across them? Well, if you remember, when I was here 2 years ago, I mentioned this about rush-seated ladder-back chairs. We'd never ever found one with a maker's name on, which made it so difficult to sort out which model of chair was made where. But I've been doing that over the years in Lincolnshire, and I look for chairs with a provenance. And after a while you find that one pattern seems to be made in this town, and another pattern seems to be made in that town. And then you can find out the name of the makers in those towns. And I have been sorting it out in Lincolnshire, and there's more work to do as well. Could we apply the same to him? Well, I'm sure we could. But the problem is finding his chairs, and the chances of finding his chairs are pretty remote. And if we did find them, where would we want to find them? We would want to find them in those places that he mentioned. Well, I have to tell you a little story now about something that I do quite regularly. If I ever get any spare time, it doesn't matter where I am, I always look for the nearest church. And I'm sure a lot of you do as well. It's a great source of vernacular furniture. In fact, last year I discovered in Lincolnshire 2 unrecorded medieval chests. The chairman of the Regional Furniture Society, he specialises in medieval chests, so I was delighted to photograph them and send them to him, and he puts them on his record and his database. But several years ago, I was in Newark, and I had a little bit of time to spare, so I went into the nearest church. And there was a big church, there's always a bit of furniture in there, ecclesiastical sort of stuff, nothing special, and I thought I'd just go over and have a look at the chairs, and I was turning the chairs upside down looking for a name, like I always do, and I got accosted by the church warden. He wasn't very happy, I can tell you. So I had to explain what I was doing with his furniture, turning it upside down. And when I explained what I was doing there, looking for old chairs, his demeanour changed. He said to me, "We've got a couple of old chairs downstairs in the crypt. Would you like to see them?" Well, if anybody ever says anything like that, I wouldn't say no. So I said, "I'd love to see them." He said he hadn't got the key. "Can you come back next week?" So of course, I was there next week. He had the key. We went to the gate, opened the gate, went down the steps into the crypt. There in the corner were 2 really distressed wrecks of chairs. They were facing the wall so nobody could use them because they were totally unusable, and they were old. I said to him, those chairs essentially are worthless, and he agreed with me. But I said to a furniture historian, those are probably quite important chairs. And I said that for a reason. Because I recognise them. Like all furniture historians, I search online to see what's in other people's collections. And the one place I had looked several times was in the V&A. And if you put Windsor chair into the search box in their collection, you'll be surprised how few Windsor chairs they've got. But they had one big Windsor chair, which they called a forest chair, and it was quite distinct. And I remember the pattern. When I saw these 2 chairs in this crypt in Europe, I recognised them. They were similar to the ones in the V&As. They were happy to let me have them. I took the bits back in my car, and the very first thing I did was got in touch with a friend of mine who is a conservator in Lincoln, Tim Garland. He is one of the country's best conservators. He had them for several weeks, and he worked magic on them. He stabilised the wood for a start because it was so dry and crispy and it was falling apart. He then stuck the bits and pieces together and he made repairs as well. And what he ended up with was a usable chair. Well, in fact, there were 2 chairs there. Would you like to see one of those chairs? That was a silly question, wasn't it? Look at this. Have you ever seen anything like that? Yes, please. Thank you, Jude. Just look. Is that old or is this old? Have you ever seen anything like that before? And what you can't see from where you're sitting, but if I turn it upside down, it becomes immediately obvious, it has been originally painted green. There is green paint all over this. Everywhere you look, there's little facets. You can come and have a look at this later. There's little pieces of green paint absolutely everywhere. So it's all right finding these chairs, but how do I know who made them? There's one in the V&A, I got 2, they're exactly the same pattern. And I looked at these chairs, and I looked at them quite a while, and I thought to myself, I've seen this pattern of chairs somewhere else before. And I bet there's people in this room who've actually seen the same pattern of chair somewhere else in Lincolnshire. Any takers? Anybody think, and the ones you would have seen would have been painted black. How many people have been in Lincoln Cathedral? Everybody puts their hands up. We've all been in Lincoln Cathedral. If you go in the, not the main entrance, but the back entrance, which is by the opposite the Eastgate Hotel where the traffic lights are, if you go in that door, you go straight into the cafe. Yeah, you've all done it. Good cafe, very nice. If you go in there, turn left, go upstairs, that is where the medieval documents are kept. How many of you have done that? Yes, lots of you have. And there's a door open there, and you can look into the Wren Library. Yes, you would have seen the exact pattern of not 1, not 2, they have got 6. And I know the lady in charge of the library, Julie Taylor, and I said to her, can I come back and have a look at your chairs? And can I stand one of my chairs next to your chairs? And she was very obliging, and she arranged a day when there was nobody there, so I was allowed to go back. And in fact, I went back with Tim Garland, who is the conservator. Would you like to see a picture of one of the... Do you think actually I could go to the Wren Library and get one of those chairs out? No. But I can photograph them when I was there. And if we can have the next picture, please. That is one of the chairs which is in the Wren Library in Lincoln. And if you look, just look at this leg here. Can you see the wasted middle section? It is identical to the wasted middle section of that chair there. And look at these back supports, how they go up and then they come out, just like those. The telling feature for me, which is the absolute hallmark of these chairs, is the seat. It is tremendously carved and scalloped out into a saddle shape. And it's done in a very professional manner. The edges are chamfered here, so when you look at it, it actually looks quite thin. And underneath it, they have made a huge cutout underneath there as well. I have never ever seen seats like that before, but you can see quite clearly it's on there. What a coincidence. 2 of those in Europe, 6 of these in the Wren Library in Lincoln. It could be just a coincidence. It could just be a coincidence. So what what we needed to do, what I needed to do, was to find chairs somewhere else. And the other places that I mentioned was Nottingham, Gainsborough and Grantham. Wouldn't it be fantastic to find chairs in one of those places? And I think there's people here tonight who've been somewhere and actually seen another one of these chairs, and you just look at it and walk past because you've never heard me talk before, so why would you look at it? How many people here have been to Gainsborough Old Hall? Yes, right. Here's a message for all of you who haven't been to Gainsborough. The message is simple. Don't bother to go. They've got no chairs in there of interest at all. It's a lovely building, but the furniture has all gone. But I would advise all of you to go to Gainsborough, because if you get to Gainsborough, you can go over the River Trent, head west, take the first right, and you can drive up to Epworth. How many of you have been to Epworth Rectory Museum? Yes, there's a lot of people. And I hope you had your eyes open when you were walking around there. If you go in the front door, I went last month, and I was amazed at what I found there. If you go in the front door, turn left into the first room, what do you think is in there? Can we have the next picture? Oh, I know. There is a plaque on the top which says this was used as a pulpit by John Wesley in 1801. This chair is not exactly identical to that. This one has got turned underneath support. It's got the same leg. It's got the identical seat. I have no doubt that chair, this chair, the one in the V&A, and the ones in the Wren Library all came out of the same workshop. What a coincidence. Do you think there's any more chairs about?
Yes, there's one.
Oh, now, come on. Play the game. Right, once you've finished looking in that chair, you need to go back into the entrance and go upstairs. And when you go upstairs, take the door on the left to the front bedroom, and you will find this. Let me have the next slide. That's up there as well. And it's got a plaque on the top. Sorry, if you go back one, just go back there. It's got a plaque on the top, and it says this chair was used by the Reverend John Wesley in 1756. And then again, look at the seat. It's a heavily carved seat. It is slightly different. In fact, the legs are slightly different, and I'm not sure that the legs are original. The lady there, Gillian Corley, she was ever so helpful. She's a curator. She's going to have a look through her archives to see how long they have had these chairs, because they may have been gifts to them. But if they were gifts, they would have records. How fantastic is that? I found all of these chairs in all of these places that he mentions. Well, Epworth is not Gainsborough, but it is close. I put it to you, members of the jury, after hearing all this circumstantial evidence, that the maker of all of these chairs, Joseph Newton, is guilty of doing it. I can't prove it, but if we're using circumstantial evidence, he is the likely candidate. And he is the earliest known Windsor chair maker in the world. Isn't that fantastic? Do you think it can get any better?
Yes.
We have found, I think that is a typical forest chair. That was painted green. It hasn't really got very little decoration on it. It's made completely out of ash. I think that was meant to go in a gentleman's garden. The ones in the Wren Library, and this one as well, they're all painted black. They are smaller, they're more compact, and I think that was the indoor variety. So what is the one thing we haven't found yet? The back stores. What is the chance of finding a back store? Well, I have to tell you, I've got some very strange friends. And one of them sat down here now. I got an email from Julian just over a week ago telling me at 2:30 in the morning he'd been surfing the net and he
Guilty.
had found something he thought I might find of interest. And next morning when I woke up and read his email, I had a look. He recognised it and I recognised it as well. And if you want to show the next slide, please, look at this. That is what Julian has spotted. And if you look, it's got these wasted back legs there. It's not very easy to see, but that middle section is wasted exactly the same as that. It's got these cabriole turn front legs. They appear on one of the pairs in the Wren Library. This is one in the Wren Library, by the way. Just look at that top cresting rail. The pattern is the same. But again, the giveaway is the seat. Just look, it's difficult to see with this. I'm sorry, it's not slightly better. But the seat has got that huge cutout and it's deeply carved out as well. I have not handled that chair yet. But what I've seen of it, I am in no doubt that that is one of his backstories. And on that bombshell, I think I've said enough. You're all very quiet anyway. So that is, Jean's pointing over here.
There's another veil to come on.
Look at this. It just shows you now. No, leave it on there. That's right. Go and get them both on. Look at this one. This one belongs to somebody in Louth. And you sat over there. You bought this a fortnight, 3 weeks ago.
About 3 weeks ago.
It turned up at a sale down in Essex. Julian was not going to miss this chair. He drove down there and he bid on it and he brought it back. So this chair now is in Louth, and I am sure that if you want to have a close look at it, Julian will be quite happy to accommodate you. It's well worth studying. I'm sure other ones might turn up, but now you all know the pattern. There's one thing I would like you all to do. I'll give you a handout now we've finished talking, and it's got some pictures of these chairs on. And if you can look in friends' houses or in public buildings or anywhere you go, it wouldn't surprise me if we eventually find more of these chairs. I am convinced these were made in Lincolnshire by the earliest known Windsor chairmaker in the world. And the other thing you could do if you wanted to, you can actually buy these new today. There is somebody in here who would happily make these chairs for you. And he's sat over there. Would you like to stand up, Rob? No, probably not. You all know Rob Lee. Rob Lee has got one of these chairs, one that I found in Europe. He's starting to make them, and if you want one of these chairs, or maybe one of the side chairs, when we get it back up to Lincolnshire, he will be happy to make one for you. And he's taking orders when you leave. So there's one thing I want you to leave with you tonight, is I would love for you to look everywhere you go. If we can find one more chair, particularly if it's in Nottinghamshire or Lincolnshire, I think we'll be absolutely 100% convinced these were made by Joseph Newton of Fanta. There we are.
Yep.
There must be some questions. Really, there must.
Yes, when did the curved structures come into being?
Oh, petticoat stretchers that I call them. Is that something?
Yeah. That's a good point that you just mentioned, Jean. Jean, you're talking about crinoline stretchers, and none of these ones I've brought today have got a crinoline stretcher. It's a stretcher that goes underneath, which is like a cow horn. I think they've been about forever. I don't think you can put a date on something like that. And they really add a touch of class and gracefulness to the chair. I think they're more difficult to do, but I find all the best quality Lincolnshire chairs that were made in Grantham and places like that, when they were made out of yew, they often had that stretcher. I think it's difficult to put a date. I wouldn't know how to put a date on that. I think they made them quite late on, and I'm sure they made them very early as well.
Yes, Andy.
Another stretcher question. I see on that chair you've got stretchers and these ones you haven't.
Yeah.
Is there a period in time where the stretcher was introduced full stop?
Well, Jean just mentioned that she called them petticoat stretchers, and if these were out in the aristocracy's houses up and down the country, you could imagine the ladies wanting to go to these garden seats to enjoy the weather and the garden, but to keep out of the sun. If they had all of their skirts on, they would not want to have something underneath here. That is one reason why the chairs are so big. The reason I think these haven't got a stretchers, and Rob will probably back me up with this, one thing you cannot see from where you are, this seat started out as a massively thick slab of wood. It's about 2.5 inches thick. And the legs are socketed all the way through. You can see them coming out at the top here. And if you're not going to have stretchers, the only way the leg is attached to the seat is through that socket. And you need plenty of wood there to stabilise it. When you start using stretchers underneath, you're building in extra strength, you could use thinner seats. That's an interesting point to see if those seats, and they certainly look slightly slimmer, thinner. Just a different building.
Ruth, yes. Is he hesitating?
I found what you said absolutely fascinating. But I wondered if you had any information about Windsor chair making in Louth. All that area.
Yeah, there was a chair factory in Louth late in the Victorian period.
A chap called Fred Hoggard.
Yes, Julian probably knows more about it.
He was apprenticed to John Garris House in Worksop, and he gradually worked his way east from about 1850 onwards. And I first found him playing cricket in the Derby Mercury in 1850. And he ends up in 1891 in Grimsby, and in the intervening 40 years he makes Windsor chairs in Raisin and then comes to Louth. And one of the reasons we've had problems trying to work out what North Lincolnshire Windsors look like. We know what South Lincolnshire Windsors look like, and I think it's because they look like Nottinghamshire chairs because people were coming east from Worksop, who had trained in Worksop, and therefore, I mean, I'm doing quite a lot of work on that at the moment. But he at one stage, after the carpet factory shut, he took over the premises of the carpet factory and was using the undershot water wheels there, to power the lathes. And his son, whose name escapes me, I think possibly another Frederick, took over, and I think it was still making Windsor chairs up to about 1895. And the father ends up as a greengrocer in Grimsby. He got bored with making chairs.
But the interesting thing is, we have never found a chair with a Louth stamp on it, and I don't think they exist. They made chairs by the thousands when they were making them, because there's a report of them making them, and they said they could turn them.
Yes, it's about 1900 and something, that report that I got from you.
Yes.
That was when he was actually doing some sort of conveyor belt process, because the article said something like one was issued from the factory every 7 minutes or something like that. It was quite amazing.
So in a week, they would have made thousands of chairs, but they didn't sell them, they would have retailed them. And that is probably the reason there was never a maker's mark put on them. The ones that I showed you over there were made 100 years earlier, and they wanted to compete with their competitors. That is the reason they put their maker's name on them. But we would love to know what was the pattern of the Louth chair. We can't work it out. John's going to say.
No, I have. It's something I was meaning to do, because a few years ago a friend of mine has a good collection of the Louth flood postcards, and in one or two that I've seen, they're fetching chairs out. We fell off my chair. They're fetching chairs out onto the road, and you can see quite. I think it's the Louth flood, with quite a few chairs out on the street.
Yes, I've seen those.
And worth looking at.
Yeah, I've seen them. Lots of
To
them.
see
Yeah.
Well, we ought to
all
revisit
sorts of
that
chairs there.
They're not terribly clear though. I couldn't make out really what.
Oh, yeah. It's a while since I've seen them, and I didn't look at them in that context.
Mm.
Yes.
What are the materials used for the chairs? Are there special timbers in different parts, like osiers for the rails or something, or ash, or...?
That's a good question. And it's really important to understand which woods, or recognise which woods are used in which chairs. If the chairs were made down in the Thames Valley, which is so close and half surrounded by the Chilterns, there is a massive beechwood forest. And you, inevitably, in all the Thames Valley chairs I've seen, you find beechwood. Beech did not arrive in Lincolnshire naturally until sort of after 1800, well after 1800 when it was brought up here. In all of these chairs there is no beech wood. The ones that we've inspected are made entirely out of ash.
There's good material.
It is a good material. They knew exactly what they were doing. Being wheelwrights and carpenters, they knew exactly what they were doing. But that's a really important fact, because if they were made in the Thames Valley, you would have found beech in there. We found no beech at all. So that is another pointer. The interesting thing about this little side chair here, when I received the photographs of that, it's quite obvious to me that it was made out of ash, but I didn't recognise the wood in the seat.
Ah, yeah, it could be different, couldn't it?
It was different, and I'm familiar with woods and I can recognise woods, and it wasn't a wood that I recognised. So I sent the picture to Tim Garland, again, who's so good with woods. He immediately replied to me. He said it was made out of English walnut. And I never see walnut. I never see walnut in Lincolnshire chairs.
Is it doweled together out of 2 or 3 pieces, the actual
No.
seat?
No, it's not. That's a good point. But it has been split at one time. If you turn it over, you can see there's been a piece of wood there with the screw holes to secure the split. Somebody has taken that off and re-glued it.
And you did some work recently, didn't you, to demonstrate that about half the seats are ash and about half the seats are elm in your collection.
In Lincolnshire, and that's what it was. Yeah, that was quite a large number of chairs.
And in Nottinghamshire, it's nearly all elm. Ash is much rarer.
Yeah, same with the Thames
More
Valley.
you in Nottinghamshire.
Mm. Yeah. It's important to know which woods are used. It can be a real indicator from where the chairs came from.
Have you used probate inventories at all?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is just typical what furniture historians do. They search through inventories. And if we know other people are looking at inventories, we will ask them, if you've come across the word chair, let us know, because we can't search every one. And it's a really good pointer. The only trouble is, vernacular furniture, the stuff we're talking about usually, a lot of those houses did not have inventories. It's only the big palatial aristocracy sort of houses that have inventories. But these were the sort of houses that they were sold into. These were expensive chairs, 7 and 6 each, and the carriage.
And all the early inventories I've looked at just say chairs and they don't specify which. So it's
Say again, sorry, what?
So it's quite a rise from sixpence a chair in 1720 by Kent.
Sixpence?
No, it's 7 shillings and 6pence.
William said sixpence, but
I thought
he did say sixpence, but he meant 6 shillings. You read the carriage line instead of the cost line.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
The accountant in
No, they were
the...
very similar. They were very similar.
Yes, no, they were both 6. It was six bob for the seat and 6 for the carriage.
What about the tools that were used? I mean, were the bases sculpted out with a big chisel, curved chisel on out?
Well, the best person to answer that is sat next to you. Rob knows all about woodworking. Rob has made hundreds of chairs in his time.
They have a bottom adze, which is a curved adze. So it's like an axe that's turned around at 90 degrees to the handle, and that's what they make the chair seat from. They rough it out with the bottom adze, and then they finish it off with a trebuchet and then a scrape.
If you turn these chairs over, you can see all the tool marks underneath there, so people like Rob can work out immediately how they were made. And if you want to see Rob making one of these chair seats, in that handout I'm going to give you tonight, there is a link, and if you go onto that link, there is a YouTube video of Rob making one of these seats. There's a lot of information on there. Yes, Tom.
Are you saying that all your figurative fencing chairs have ash seats, none of them have elm?
I haven't come across one yet with elm in them.
There's one that we think is in the set, but haven't managed to get our paws on.
And would that be a later chair, or would that be one of the earlier?
It looks as though it's got the same sculpted seat, and from the photograph that I've tracked down, it looks as though it's an elm seat, but I'm not sure. The problem is that some dealers have a nasty habit of French polishing things to bits, and so you can, if you put enough French polish on it, you can make it look like anything.
And secondly, the scratch sort of moulding on the crest rails, have you been able to match them? Because I know it's a chair pattern would change from shrinkage over time and so on, but have you been able to match the mouldings, let's say, from different chairs that you think is by the same maker?
I just think the moulding is just a fairly common basic moulding, and the moulding, and it's here, and it's here, and it's here, and it appears on all of them. It's a uniting feature with all of these chairs. You're right, we could make a little die and to see if it fits there, but I suspect it would, because they all have got it.
I mean, this is in fact the first time we've had these two in the same room tonight. So.
Yes.
What about the spindles? What are the spindles? Are they willow or
ash? Every component is ash. But then again, you see, that's a really good question, because if you feel these, you can feel the little facets on them. It's quite clear when you run your hand round them, there's little flat areas, which means they weren't turned on a lathe. They were made with a draw knife. Well, these here are quite round, and these were turned on a lathe. And you can quite clearly feel the difference between the two. If you want to go up here and handle these and feel these, you can feel them so clearly. Tiny little facets, little flat edges.
well, they're like the coppice timbers, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's your answer. Rob knows far more about that.
Can I please ask you about this one? Because this has got a very shallow seat on it. I mean, it's, you know, it's only about half of my thigh's going to go on there. It's so shallow. But is this something that's Lincolnshire again?
It is. It is. And I just think that it is cutting down to an absolute minimum the amount of materials that we're putting into chairs. This one is stamped by Taylors of Grantham, and I think it was made in the workshop of Sophia Taylor because her husband died, Roger, and I think they had a contract to supply the military with chairs. And if they had a contract to supply the military, and this was in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, from 1800 to 1810 that they were making chairs, if they got a contract, they would supply them at a set amount per chair, and every little bit of saving that they could make, that was their profit.
We've tracked down an advertisement in a Suffolk newspaper where when peace arrives in 1815, they sell off the contents of the barracks. And in the listing of what's for sale, there are 700 Windsor chairs.
That was one lot.
That was one lot from one of
Windsor
the barracks.
chairs. And those barracks were up and down the country, and somebody would have had to supply them with Windsor chairs.
And that is a lot of chairs.
Yeah.
Especially for 1815.
And all of their chairs are absolutely built down to a price, and it's so obvious that they are. And that's part of it, Jim, as well.
And the ones we think it was is the ones like the first one that well, is that, I can't remember which one. That's Hubbard, isn't it? And that's a slightly more upmarket one. But they're spindlebacks, basically.
Yeah.
Not too much ornament.
Are you any of you aching to ask more questions?
I'm just
Yes.
wondering if anybody here has ever sat in the Haddon Owen solicitors' offices in Louth.
Oh,
They're
yes.
closed now, but I seem to remember a chair that looked pretty similar to one of
Oh.
those up there.
Like this.
I think so. They had some really old-looking Windsor chairs and a variety of them in the office where clients like me used to sit.
I've been in there because somebody told me about that.
Yeah, Wilkin Chapman, but I think they will have been transferred over from
No,
that
this,
round.
it was Haddon Known where Patrick Purvis used to be before he went to Bridge McFarlane. You know, is it Northgate down opposite the church, that building at the end?
It's the corner of Eastgate, that one.
Yeah.
It's Eastgate.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went in there
It's
too.
closed down now.
Yeah, 2 years ago though, it was open, I think, wasn't it?
No, a few years ago.
I sent it to Wilkin Chapman's office in Rosemary Lane because there were a whole load of Windsor chairs there.
Is that the one I've seen?
I think so.
A lot of them were Nottinghamshire chairs.
Right.
Did go and have a
Okay.
look. Thank you.
We'll have to
Well,
see
I
it.
asked Patrick that.
If you would.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure we can find more of these. Now we know what we're looking for. Because before, nobody knew about Newton and nobody had any idea that he could have made these chairs.
Right. Any other comments? If not, I'm going to ask Nigel if he'll come up and thank me for me. Oh, I'm sorry, Richard.
If you lean back in those two magnificent chairs that were on the table, it must creak quite a good deal. I'm surprised that there aren't heavier corner posts going up there, you know, with bigger sockets into the place, just to make the thing more rigid.
But I'm not exactly small, and I sit in that one all the time at the moment. What I would advise all of you to do, actually, please, we'll get them down, sit in them, and they are amazingly comfortable. So we'll fish them down in a minute, and everybody can have a feel.
Are you sure?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Well, I sit
welcome.
every day. If you can
Welcome
stand
to-
my weight, and I'm probably the heaviest person in the
You're
room.
welcome to come and sit in them.
Just before I'm going to abuse my vote of thanks here, for the military, they would have probably specified the weight of each chair, would they? Because they always gave, when they gave out orders, or they would have been very, very particular about how many chairs would weigh so much for transport, and is that possibly why it was trimmed so thin and...
That's an interesting point. That's a really interesting question. I actually weigh the chairs that I've got, so I can compare them. Marshes of Sleaford always made the heaviest chairs. It's so obvious when you weigh them. And the lightest ones you come across are Taylors like that. They made incredibly light chairs, and they cut down on the number of spindles, they cut down on the decoration, they built them down to a price. And it was only later on in the war and after the war that the pattern changed, they got bigger, there was more work put into them, they became more elegant because they were selling to a different market. They were selling into households, they weren't building to contracts.
But I think that's a brilliant suggestion, Nigel, because that might be why they reduced it. Because you don't want to carry. You don't want to carry too much weight if you can avoid it.
Well, I think I'm sort of stating the obvious now, where we've got an absolutely riveting talk. If you saw it as a title, you'd think, well, I'll go along anyway. But to be honest, to be able to bring the chair alive and have the feeling in the room of interest, the interaction and chatting and questions is absolutely wonderful. It's been fantastic. I noticed that one of your quotes, because I did a little bit of, I'll call it research, most people call it Google, but you said that these have very little value in the sale room. Is that still so?
The ones behind you, they're incredibly cheap. And particularly the cabinet makers' chairs, I bought a pair of those, and that one of them, down at Bateman's in Stamford. And I couldn't believe how little I had to pay for them. They're just so unfashionable. And that one, as I say, is made entirely out of elm. It's a beautiful thing, 200 years old, and yet nobody wants them. If you want to have nice chairs in your house, now is the time to buy them. Not only that, you can get Lincolnshire chairs, and in one of the articles in the link is how to recognise a Lincolnshire chair compared with a Nottinghamshire one or a Thames Valley one.
And I think there, we've just put all the prices up because everyone's going to go out. But can I say, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to quote you again. it's essential they're not destroyed, but saved for the benefit history of rural craft in the county. And I think you've now got a good number of converts who are going to go out and look and save these. It's been absolutely fascinating, most enjoyable, and I'm sure that if you stand too near the chairs, you're going to have people probably feeling you as well as the chairs. They're going to come up and they want to see what was going on. And that was absolutely wonderful. So can I ask you to say thank you to William again? Thank you very much.